I'd like to open out to the floor now, if that's possible, for any questions or comments, so we can just kind of bring everybody in the audience into play somehow as we carry on this conversation. I'm just going to put up the chat thing here. So yes, if you'd like to use the chat function to type in any questions you may have, or if you would like to speak, maybe, if you want anything to say.
So I've just popped back to say hello, and we're sort of around about got about 20 minutes to half an hour to sort of have a conversation with the rest of you, to bring you into it. The way we'd like to do this, just to manage it more easily, is to sort of make, as Rowan says, make your comment or question and write it into the chat. And then if you're comfortable, you can stop your video and we can see you. Let's see. Right. I've just got someone saying that the chat says that I can only email you privately. Okay. I'm not quite sure how that's taken place. So if anyone can send me a chat message and I can open it up. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, so there's a couple of comments coming through, Rowan, and it looks as like it's only me that can read them. I'm really sorry about that. That's a technical issue. So I'm going to ask one question on behalf of someone. They've said, I'd be very interested in hearing the panel discuss the idea of skill. Would anyone like to take that on? What's this idea of skill? And there we are. There, she's stopped her video. Do you want to explain what you mean by that?
First of all, it's been fascinating. Thank you very much for everyone for your thoughts. But I suppose I'm really interested in that interlinking between the ideas of craft and art. I grew up in a family where one person was a craftsperson and the other person was an artist, and there was huge rows all the time about which was better. So from a very early age, and it's something that has continually absorbed me. I love the idea of someone being called a craftsperson. I think that's really important. But I'd be very interested to hear what the panel think about the idea of skill. You tend to think of a craftsperson or a designer maker or whatever as someone who's very skilled at what they do. I think that for me, looking at something, going into someplace, it could be jewelry or ceramics or textiles or whatever, there's always that sense of honoring, oh my goodness, they really know how to do this. Do you have the same thing with art? I'm an artist, but I'm just really curious to hear what the panel have to say about that.
I'll say something on that. So, and I don't know if it's what you're looking for in your question, but when I look at some art, not all art, but I really enjoy the process of kind of like, and maybe this is the crafts person in me doing it, but I really enjoy unpicking the process of what a painter has done in order to get that painting done. So while I really enjoy the kind of like the artworks themselves for whatever they are, I really enjoy getting up close to a painting so that it sets the alarms off with my nose, understanding what skills have kind of like gone into the work. But having said that, whether I recognise skill in the making of the artwork or not doesn't make me think that the work of art is better or not. But I personally enjoy unpicking that. And I read a book about painting, and I'm terrible with remembering names. I can get it off the shelf if you want. About you can always spot a painter in a gallery because they're the one standing in front of it working out, oh, how did that brush stroke, how did they make that? It's not just a looking thing, it's a physical thing of understanding how things have happened. But I only do that with paintings. I don't do it with anything else. I don't know why.
I suppose I'm asking that question because I find sometimes when I'm looking at work, if I get too immersed looking at, say, contemporary art, if I get too immersed in how it's made, I get cross because it's stopping me from thinking through or getting immersed in the idea behind the work. Whereas when I look at something that is coming from an inherited sort of skill in the way that Julia was talking about, that sort of practical knowledge that has informed that act of making, or the practical need that's informed that act of making, it's just a different feeling. I want to embrace the skill. And I suppose that is what I'm curious about and want to find out what you guys think about that. I didn't word the question properly first.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, but it's easier to look at the process in a craft item, isn't it? It's easier. Well, it's easier for me, but maybe that's my background because I don't have an arts background. So if I go to a gallery to look at art, I just look at it for the art. I don't look at it like Nicola, looking at the process or the technique, because I don't have an understanding of that really, or the skill to do it myself. So I'm not trying to unpick it. I'm just appreciating what I see. Again, I don't know if that's really answering your question. Whereas I guess with crafted items, what you are looking for, it's more obvious whether that something has been well made, considered, whether there's a quality of making there. You can tell. It's more obvious, but I don't really think that answers your question, but I don't know. I don't think I've got an answer.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think it's really what's necessary. I've worked with printers. I've made work where printers have got the technology to make the work, or Banfield Castle manufacturers, they've got the technology to make the work. Laser cutters, they have that skill. But for me, skill is, getting from A to B. I need geographic skill to find my place. To find a venue is a skill that I need. I need a skill in terms of filing all my proposals, my applications. I need skills in funding and raising money. I need skills in the intimacy of sewing, and sometimes I don't need skill at all, and I can leave, or I want to pass it on to somebody else to engage with completely and entirely, and I will take, I'll stand right back from it. So I am amazed at how many different sorts of skills are required just in making a piece of work, and when you're slightly clumsy or you're not very good have a very good sense of direction, it highlights all the things you don't know and the things that you need to compensate, constantly being resourceful and trying to cover up the skills that you can't do very well if you can't outsource it, and make the best of it, but where necessary, I think it's where is the skill needed, I think you can kind of get absorbed sometimes in the pleasure as a just pleasurable aspect. Now, is that the intended outcome or not? Because it may not be. It may not be about pleasure, and so there's no point in that skill giving you pleasure. So it sort of depends, I think, on what's necessary for the work.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring in a couple more comments here. Dion, I'm sure you won't mind me reading your comment out. It says, sometimes it can be torturous to go to exhibitions when you're visually unpicking the process. Thank you, by the way, for your question. I couldn't quite make out your name, the lady who was just there. So thank you so much. That was a lovely question. And as Dion says, it can be torturous if we're visually unpicking the process, working out how it's done. That can be a block to enjoying the art. Interesting point. So what I'm going to try and do is bring in Jacqueline now. Let's see. this works. If it works, great. If it doesn't, no. It looks like Jacqueline has got some issues, but I'm going to read out her comments if that's all right, Rowan. So Jacqueline made a really interesting point. She said, thanks for a really interesting discussion to date. One thought that I had is that the attitudes towards the term art and craft are not only rooted in domesticity, but also in class and gender. That's something that Claire was talking about earlier. Does anyone want to comment or say something about that?
I'll make a comment on that, actually. I think it absolutely is, but I think while we keep holding on to the fact that it is based in class, like kind of like dabbling in a bit of cross stitch is a nice middle class thing to do, I think while we continue to kind of think about it and hold it in that vein, I think actually we close ourselves off to seeing all of the amazing work that's out there. I think it's a very quick way of closing the conversation down and saying that it's rightly or wrongly so, that it has no value. And I think it's been used in kind of like in art literature and all kinds of kind of places to kind of like just kind of push it into that kind of like area. And I think it closes it down to a lot of things, but that's not to say that I think it does get categorized by its domestic kind of starting points. It's very gendered, a lot of it and stuff, but I personally am trying to kind of like open up that kind of conversation to be much more, I suppose, inclusive, so that we can start to recognize the value in the work that's there.
You'll be pleased to hear, Nicola, that Jacqueline has put in the chat, I totally agree with Nicola's response. So that's
fabulous.
Anyone else got anything to speak around this sort of idea of class and gender? I mean, is it reductive to say that classically an artist would have been a man and a crafter would have been a woman, or is that completely ridiculous? I don't know.
It's generalizations, isn't it, in everything, and historically and where we are now are two different things. Of course, there have always been female artists as well as male artists, but were they appreciated as much at the time? I don't know. Like a lot of things, we look back through time with a different attitude, and we look at things differently now than we did. So there's probably people being discovered all the time and reconsidered and re-evaluated.
Claire, did you want to say something?
Oh, it is. Yeah, obviously, yeah, it is gendered, and it's. I suppose we're looking at quite a Western perspective as well of craft. I've worked in Japan, and yeah, it's pretty gendered there, but there's slightly different sort of hierarchical systems, I think, that would be unfamiliar to us in Europe. So I think it sort of depends where you're coming from, which continent you live in, and obviously each continent will provide different sorts of histories. I mean, I think there are, being a woman, today, there is multitasking which has to take place, and it is sometimes easier to make something with fabric that can be popped into a rucksack and I make a lot of my work in the car, and I have done in the past, because that's a transportable studio that I can have while I'm waiting for my son to play football. That's the reality of being a woman artist, and it's not the past, it's the present, reality. But I'm not a politician, but I experience it through the work. But I don't ever feel that I've been discriminated against in terms of projects that I've received or I haven't received. So I don't know if that's just lucky or a coincidence. So I don't feel I've been discriminated against, but being a woman brings with it a certain degree of restriction because of the sort of roles that still played. I mean, just a small fact which I found quite outstanding. I mean, I'm a single mum, but I heard that during COVID, men have taken on half an hour more tasks a week in the family. that's right now at this moment, and I can fully believe that.
Extreme,
So that does mean, that if we live in that kind of society in Britain at the moment, and women are determined to make work, it can be quite challenging if you're making large-scale painting within that context.
Rowan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, just spot on, Claire.
Francis made an interesting point right at the start. Would you like to say something, Francis? You were talking about on the chat about how you don't think there's a huge difference between art.
Yeah, sure. So I do craft. I make things, and for me, craft. When you were talking about art and craft, and art being more theoretical and conceptual, and craft being more practical, I think there is, for me, there's a more overlap than some of the people in the panel. I try and make things that have ideas and political messages within them, as well as being nice to look at and well made. I just wanted to make that comment so that
No, it's good. Can I just ask, Francis, so if it has a political message, do you then think of that as art rather than craft?
I kind of think of it as both, because it's me crafting something. I'm queer. I identify as LGBT, and to me, making things that have rainbow aspects or LGBT flags or things that mean something to people is very important. And for me, that's both art and craft. It has the message behind it that maybe people think of as art, but they're practical items that people can use and people can display, and they're made. I'm a crocheter and a knitter and a weaver and a felter. So those craft elements are really have used to make something.
Francis, so do you have an affinity with craftivism? Where do you sit in relation to craftivism?
Yeah, like
craft activism.
I really think that you can. It's a really important thing to think about, because if you're making something with your hands, you can put messages that you feel, because I really think, yeah.
I completely agree with what you're saying, Francis. So, but what I do find that what happens is when people talk about craft, or when people, as soon as something feels like it's more important, like it has a message and that it's communicating something that I agree with you is really important to get out there, it can't just be craft. And sometimes I feel really sad about that, and I'm like, it's great, it's fabulous, it's really important, and it's really powerful, and that's craft. So,
I think it can just be craft,
Yeah, absolutely.
Why can't you making something? Why can't it just be craft?
No, I agree. But often people will suddenly say something's art to kind of immediately give it importance, and that actually this isn't just a kind of a throwaway thing. So, but I play around in both fields myself, so it's not. But I have, and I guess I have that kind of dilemma with myself when I'm kind of like needing to label something, I guess, and apply it to a particular context. So, but I wish we would shout up for crafts a lot more.
A couple more comments. Has anyone got any more to say on what Francis has said? Well, bye, Francis. Well, someone's just commented, craftivism, love it. So that must feel that's great. Yeah. Great word. I'd like to read out a comment that Katrina has written, if that's all right with Katrina. It's less of a question than a comment. There was a bit of discussion about diversity. this language feels a little problematic. And Katrina's just saying that her internet's a bit jumpy, so it might be easier just to for me to read it. I'll see if you can. I'll bring Katrina in. We're talking about diversity. I'll just see if it works, Katrina, because we might as well try. Let's see if this is going to work. It's all these technical gubbins and all this sort of stuff. I don't think it is. I think it's. Yeah, I think some people's connections aren't great. So I'll read out from the start. It says, "Thank you for the insightful talk. It's less of a question than a comment. There's a little bit of a discussion about diversity, and this language feels a little bit problematic, and inclusion earlier on in the in craft, which is a really important conversation to have, and intrinsically linked with craft and the art world in general, which I agree is something we should be questioning. I think for future panels, and this is something I agree with, it'd be good to bear this in mind and include more people, specifically Black, Asian, Indigenous and ethnic minority craftspeople, and not just white women, into this conversation. Less talk, more action. Craft can often be rooted in cultural appropriation, and it's up to us makers to be aware of this and understand what our role is within this." That's quite a challenging comment there, but I do agree that I think, you know, we can talk and talk, but until we kind of make some change ourselves, which we can do in future Wayward events, and we want to, then it makes it difficult just a bit if it's just a talking shop. Would anyone like to comment on that?
Good idea. Maybe we need to have an in conversation around that.
I think we do.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very important to open up the conversation and hear what the other positions and thoughts are, to make this a more real conversation. Completely agree.
And as Katrina's just commented to me, it is an uncomfortable conversation to have. I mean, I don't know if it is uncomfortable. We just have to sort of go, okay, well, we're not doing as well as we thought we were, and let's be better. And you know, it's hardly surprising that we could be better. We could always be better. Julia and Claire, if you'd like to say something on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair point. I think it's reflected not only in this discussion, but it will be reflected in student cohorts. It will be reflected in exhibit. You know, it will be reflected. But it doesn't mean to say that we can't be more proactive ourselves. You know, to engage in diversity. I've found though that actually the students that I'm now supervising at PhD level seem to have a real interesting diversity in terms of background. So I'm learning a lot from that to move my thinking forward. And when we were able to travel, I really appreciated being able to experience different cultures firsthand and different ways of working firsthand. And working with people is different to reading about it. So now we're sort of doing these online platforms. There's no reason that we couldn't be zooming into Australia or an Aboriginal education centre that I may have worked in the past, put a few contacts out there, see what it's like at a venue in Kyoto, bring in somebody from New York. I think that would be kind of interesting. It doesn't, and then obviously local, because I think we have to. I've been through a few decades in my practice, and when I started out, you know, travel was massive. All artists were traveling all the time. I never stopped traveling. I never needed anywhere to live because I just went from one place to another all the time. But now we can't do that because we know that it's not sustainable. You know, we know that it's going to pollute. You know, and we know we have to shift. And so these forums are great for more sustainable ways of having dialogue with different cultures. So I can't see anything to sort of, you know, hold back from that. But I don't think within, you know, being based in Huddersfield, I don't think we're actively trying to be white female. I don't think it's necessarily it's probably more. There's a sort of circumstance, and it's maybe a serendipitous sort of reality, you know, in terms of, you know, how we've been grouped together, how we've had similar kinds of education. But yeah, I find it really interesting that PhD students who will then go on to be lecturers will then, it may begin to open up new cohorts of undergraduates which may see lecturers of different ethnicity and show, yeah, you know, let's be inspired, you know, by the new students coming through. So I think it's really hopeful, actually, from my experience.
But Kim's got a comment that she wouldn't mind saying it, but she's outdoors and it's a bit rainy, so it might be a bit difficult to zoom in. But she says, more of a comment than a question, I think that sometimes crafting in a group setting can have power for creating community and a safe space for people, and that sometimes the process and space created can be more important than the outcome.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Completely.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've probably all done some teaching at some point, and it's interesting how people open up to you in that environment, and yeah, it can be a sounding board and a way of getting away from everyday life and an escape and a release. And yeah, for some reason, yeah, I have had people open up to me and talk to me in a way that perhaps I wouldn't if I just met them in a social environment. So yeah, I think there is something there. I agree.
Okay, got a couple more things here. So there's a lot of stuff coming in, people just being very thankful for a lot of the stuff that people are saying, really sort of positive comments. A couple of people had to go, but one guy in particular, let me find his thing, just says, thank you for this interesting discussion and conversation. I particularly enjoyed the discussion about skill and value, two very challenging areas to measure. The act of making is also another interesting topic, and as an individual practitioner, and whether you describe yourself as an artist or an artisan. So that's Bruce, but he's gone, so I thought I'd mention that. Laura, Laura, do you want to unstop your video and see if you can
hang on,
ask your question or say your comment, Laura?
Hey. So I'm a designer maker, and I've got a studio, and I share it with an artist, and we've found that we started influencing each other. She influences me in terms of color and shape, and she started incorporating textiles into her work. So there's that craft art thing mixing up, and I just wondered if any of the panel had that opportunity to enjoy sort of a cross-contamination between artists and crafters.
I'll kick off there. Hi, Laura. So absolutely, for the past, I would say 5 years, all of my work that I've been creating has been influenced by the local quilters. So I'm most definitely making work that looks completely different to previous work as a result of working with other people. I don't know what they would say about their work. Well, I do know a few of the things that they would say, but some of the things that they've said about their practices and the things that they do is that they're a lot more less worried about getting it wrong. Yeah. So they're kind of like open to the idea of kind of like chance in their work and stuff. So I think we are definitely influencing each other, and as a lecturer I'm constantly inspired by our students as well. They come up with just like so many kind of like interesting conversations and pieces of work that I can't help but kind of like, I don't know if it necessarily influences my practice, but it definitely influences my brain. So it makes me think about things and makes me be current, because I have to think about what's happening now and what the situation is, the world we're living in now. Mm-hmm. So it reminds me to be current and in the moment.
Cool. I guess that unfortunately I haven't really had the opportunity to have that sharing experience, and it's something I'd really like to do more of, and more collaboration in the future. I work at home, and for the last few years it's been important to me to be here to look after my family, and so the opportunities to get outside, collaborate and work with other people have been limited, really. But it's something, definitely, in fact, it's something me and my husband have been talking about recently, that it's something that I'd like to do a lot more of. And I think it's good for us to share experiences and to talk to other people and to look at other work. So yeah, definitely something I'd like to do more of.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Nicola. I think it's a real advantage being part of an institution that really opens up possibilities for collaboration. And recently I've been working with historians of humanitarianism, and I have so little I appreciated about Huddersfield and its so innovative history in relationship to fair trade and HUDFAM, which was, you know, the first fair trade in Britain, and that later became Oxfam. You know, this knowledge really helps inform what I do, but I wouldn't have known any of that had I not been working with historians, you know, and then working with fine artists as well, being kind of in collaborative artworks. You just get a very different kind of just a really different perception. Working with curators, collaborating with curators is really interesting. I find that, like, movie, you know, it's wonderful. I used to be an academic where I felt I was very sort of two-dimensional. I left my practice at home, I came and I taught, but over the last few years, I've actually found that, yeah, if you open yourself up to it, you know, and it can be really, it can lead to, you know, it can lead to disappointment, and you are vulnerable if you open up into a collaboration. But sometimes it's really fascinating, you know, sort of working across different fields and having different kind of discussions. Yeah, I always just fear that I'm not offering enough, you know, because I get back so much, and I'm like, oh, but you know, like, you know, it's just like trying to get that sort of yeah, like that balance. Yeah, is really great, and because we spend so much time, you know, making, and that does tend to be quite solitary. It's, yeah, it's useful to sort of yeah, see your work through a slightly different lens with working with other people.
Cool. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Laura. That was a really good point. We're drawing to a close now. It's nearly 1/2 past, so there's a few comments. Thanks, Laura. It's so sad when they disappear. You think, well, they're all right, they're still there. So thanks for that comment. So I'll read out a few comments. We haven't really got time to bring any more people into the conversation in reality, but I'll read their comments because there's some good points. And maybe we could sort of wrap up in the next few minutes. So Tim said, is being an artist partly about being confidence and ego? Do men tend to have more confidence and bigger egos than women? Surely not. Oh dear. So they're more likely to define themselves as an artist than a craftsperson. Who knows? Kerry's got there's a couple of really hopeful points, actually, just to sort of end on. During COVID-19, Kerry says, I've noticed that my community have come together and worked together to help the vulnerable and elderly. But also there's been an increase in wanting to create events and that sort of thing within the town. This seems an ideal time to look at bringing together crafters and artists within the community to highlight the skills people have and encourage future generations to learn. Jessica also says, my mum at GCSE level has combined art and textiles brackets craft together, and it's been very successful. The students are now learning not to see the divide between art and craft. So I think they're the sort of final points from me. Rowan, would you like to sort of wrap it up in your thoughts and get other? What do you think?
Well, I've never been one on divides, to be honest, or binaries, or setting up antagonistic relations between things or phenomena. So I'm all for entanglement. The more of that, the better. To end on a textile metaphor, let's do a bit more entanglement and embrace the messiness that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any more thoughts from the panel before we sort of wrap up?
No, it's been really. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, for the opportunity. It's been good to talk about this subject. and it's not often actually we get asked these, well, I get asked these kind of questions. So yeah, it's kind of really challenging. It's really been interesting and great feedback. It's really nice to have, you know, so many questions come back at us. I like that, it keeps you on your toes.
Anything more from you, Julia and Nicola, before
Thank you very much. It's been fascinating, and it's made me think about things that I haven't thought about before, and challenged me to look at things in different ways, which is what I'd hoped it would do. So no, it's been really interesting. Thank you.
And Nicola?
Yeah, and same for me. Thank you very much. And I just really want to kind of like search out and kind of like find opportunities to have more diverse conversations. I think it's incredibly important to kind of like engage with what's going on at the moment, but also seeing beyond just what's going on at the moment, instead of waiting for everybody to come to this door. Let's go out and create those conversations, and let's entangle everybody in.
Yes, and I think that idea of entanglement is great, and I think I like that sort of entangling world that we can create where we're all sort of entangled together. So I'm not going to read any more comments other than people are just chatting and saying thank you, and they want more, and it's really interesting. So it's been a really fascinating afternoon for me, as I hope it has been for you.